Okay. We're going to continue from the book of Numbers.
Numbers chapter 24, verse 5. How goodly are the tents, O Jacob, and the tabernacles, O Israel.
So as we can see, when it says ye shall dwell in booths, right here in Numbers, the precept is saying, how goodly are thy tents, O Jacob. So just like the tribe of Gad, they customarily dwelt in tents. They received that custom because they were Israelites, and they just kept the custom of our keeping this Feast of Tabernacles to dwell in a tent. Okay, so here we see in Numbers 24 and 5, it says, how goodly are the tents, O Jacob. Jacob is the 12 tribes. Okay, and it says, and thy tabernacles, O Israel. Okay, so we can see that dwelling in the tents or dwelling in the booths is a commandment of the Lord. Now let's take it back. We're going to go up forward. Let's go to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 16. And we'll start at verse 12.
Alright, here we go. Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 12. And thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in Egypt.
Okay, so it says we shall remember. So this is the first purpose of understanding what the importance of the Feast of Tabernacles is, that we were slaves in Egypt. So we have to remember that. The purpose of dwelling in the tents is because the children of Israel came out of Egypt and we dwelt in the wilderness for 40 years. Well, how did we dwell in the wilderness? We lived in tents. So that was a foreshadowing of what is going to come in the future, because once we come out of our final captivity, we are also going to leave Babylon, and we may sustain a kind of Americanized lifestyle to a certain extent. But eventually, once the atrocities happen around the earth as predicted in the holy manuscripts, we will eventually have to dwell in booths for survival. There's no way around it. That's the purpose of going into the wilderness. That's the purpose of keeping the Feast of Tabernacles, so that you know how to survive in the times to come and the atrocities that are ahead of us, because there's going to be atrocities and wars and famine and pestilence, and we will have to be as nomads to travel, from place to place, city to city, as the scriptures said in the scriptures. Okay, and it says, go ahead.
Deuteronomy 16, verse 12. And thou shalt remember that there was a bondman in Egypt, and thou shalt observe and do these statutes.
So we have to remember that we were slaves and bondmen and bondwomen, and we must remember to observe these statutes, okay, to keep this law. All right. Now, let's go down to the next verse. We're going to read through 15.
Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 13. Thou shalt observe the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days. After that thou hast gathered in thy corn and thy wine. And thou shalt, verse 14, and thou shalt rejoice in thy feast, thou and thy son and thy daughters, and thy manservant and thy maidservant, and thy Levite and the stranger.
The Levite,
the stranger, and the fatherless and the widow that are within thy gates.
Stop. Okay. So it says, thou shalt observe the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days, and after that you have gathered your corn and your wine. So once again, we see that it's food representation of what we will bring as a burnt offering, and wine. Some of these Israelites claim, well, I don't drink it. Well, that's a commandment. It's in the manuscripts. Okay? For some of these vegans, that's a commandment that you have a burnt offering. Okay? So a burnt offering is a meat offering, because that's what the scripture says. All right? And it says we're going to rejoice again. our children, the son and the daughter, okay, your servant, your maid servant. So anybody that work for you, if you have a business, they supposed to keep this feast also. It says, and the Levite and the stranger and fatherless, the widow that are within thy gates. So, you know, we're supposed to encourage the people who are without also to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay? All right. Go ahead to the next verse.
Deuteronomy 16, verse 15. 7 days shalt thou keep a solemn feast unto the Lord thy God, in the place which the Lord shall choose, because the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all thy increase, and in all the works of thine hands. Therefore thou shalt surely rejoice.
Okay, so right here we see the reason we're supposed to really be rejoicing is because the Lord is blessing us every year. He's blessing us through your job. He's blessing you through your business. He's blessing you with increase and blessing you with the skill of your hands to create that increase. So this is another reason why we're to dwell in the booths or the tents, because we're to reflect on the fact that he's made it possible for us to do these things. Next verse.
Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 16. 3 times in a year shall all thy males appear before the Lord thy God, in the place which he shall choose, in the feast of unleavened bread, and in the feast of weeks, and in the feast of tabernacles.
There you go.
And they shall not appear before the Lord's empty.
So when you keep these feasts, we're not supposed to appear before the Lord empty. So you're supposed to have a meat offering. You're supposed to have a drink offering. We're supposed to come together as a nation of people and then not be empty-handed, meaning to support one another when we have these gatherings in these tents. Whether you gather at a park, whether you gather in your backyard, whether you gather in your house, you should have food, you should have family there, you should have friends, and you're supposed to eat and rejoice before the Lord and give thanks for his deliverance for us and our ancestors to come out of slavery, captivity, and bondage. Okay? The last verse.
Deuteronomy 16, chapter 17. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessings of the Lord thy God, which he hath given thee.
So here we see. Now, if you got it, give it. That's all the scripture is saying. If you have it to give, because the Lord blessed you with that ability to give that portion. Okay, so now we're going to go over to the book of Hosea, chapter 12. Okay, let's get Hosea. There.
I'm here, Tom.
All right. Start at verse 9. Hosea 12 and 9.
Hosea chapter 12, verse 9. And I, that am the Lord thy God from the land of Egypt, will yet make thee to dwell in tabernacles.
In where?
In tabernacles.
Go ahead.
As in the days of the solemn feast.
Okay, so Hosea says that, okay, right here, again, because we came out of Egypt, we didn't just have a homeland to go immediately into. So we dwelled in the tents, and the tents became our tabernacle or our dwelling place, because that's what the tabernacle is, okay? It's your dwelling place, all right? So we're going to see why this is important, you know, to keep the Feast of Tabernacles and to give the burnt offerings. Now, let's look at, we're going to go down to 2 Chronicles, chapter 8. Go to 2 Chronicles 8 and 12.
Mm-hmm. 2 Chronicles chapter 8, verse 12. Then Solomon offered burnt offerings unto the Lord on the altar of the Lord, which he had built before the porch.
So right here we see even Solomon offered a burnt offering. Okay, vegetarians. Okay, keep going.
2 Chronicles chapter 8, verse 13. Even after a certain rate every day, offering according to the commandment of Moses on the Sabbath and on the new moons and on the solemn feast, 3 times in a year,
3 times,
even in the feast of unleavened bread and in the feast of weeks and in the feast of tabernacles.
In the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, so we're going to get another one here. Let's go over to Ezra, not Ezra. It's just the book of Ezra. We're going to go to chapter 3. We're going to start at verse 3. Okay,
Ezra chapter 3 verse 3. And they set the altar upon his bases, for fear was upon them because of the people of those countries, and they offer burnt offerings unto them, unto the Lord, even burnt offerings morning and evening.
So they was cooking in the morning and in the evening. Okay, so just putting it out there again. Burnt offerings. We have to cook before the Lord. Okay. All right. Let's go to verse 4.
Ezra 3 verse 4. They kept also the feast of tabernacles as it is written, and offered the daily burnt offerings by number according to the customs and the duties of every day required.
Now, so here we see again, every day we supposed to cook. Those whole 7 days, all of last week, for those of you who are not aware of this, okay, from last Sabbath, you should have been cooking, barbecuing, grilling all of the 7 days until today. All right. And it says that they did it and they offered daily. See that? So, nope, you can't say, well, we just do it. Let's read it again. As it is written. Go ahead.
Where we at? 4. They kept also the Feast of Tabernacles as it is written, and offered the daily burnt offering.
Stop. The daily burnt offerings.
By number according to the custom as the duty of every day required.
Every day required a burnt offering. So this is important. This is very important, Israel. Every day requires you during the Feast of Tabernacles to have a burnt offering. Okay? So, for the people, like I said, the Christians who think following the law is in vain, it didn't say that this stopped at no certain time. We read previously, okay, that this is a commandment forever. 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 Throughout all of your generations. Okay? Now, let's hop over to prove that, because some people in Christianity or just now coming into the truth will be like, well, why come this ain't mentioned in the New Testament? Well, let's see. Let's hop on over to the book of John. And we're going to go to John chapter 7. And we're going to start at verse 1.
All right, John chapter 7, verse 1. After these things, Yeshua walked in Galilee, for he would not walk in Jewry, because the Jews sought to kill him. Verse 2. Now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles was at hand.
The what?
The Feast of Tabernacles was at hand.
So they was keeping the Feast of Tabernacles in the New Testament. See that, Christians? In the New Testament, let's read that verse again. Verse 2.
Now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles was at hand.
The word Jew comes from Judah. So the Jews that was keeping this feast, barbecuing like black folks do all the time, had to have been black people. Because you can't beat black folks firing up the grill. Just want to put that out there. Okay? So, let's go ahead and get a precept to that. Hop on over to the Apocrypha. Second Esdras. Well, excuse me, we're going to go to First Esdras. Chapter 5.
What we doing? Second Esdras?
First Esdras.
First Esdras?
Yeah, 5 and 51. First Esdras, go over to First Esdras. Chapter 5.
Verse 51.
Kind of.
First Esdras. Let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, give me just a second.
Yes, sir.
Brother, a little slow, man. Brother, a little slow.
Electronics make it easy.
Man, them electronics be helping to put us out, don't they? All right, we ready?
First Esdras 5, verse 51. Also, they held the Feast of Tabernacles as it is commanded in the law.
Okay, stop. It's what?
Commanded in the law.
So the Feast of Tabernacles is a commandment in the law. And Yeshaya said, I have not come to destroy the law nor the prophets, but to fulfill. Okay? Go ahead.
And offered sacrifices daily as was met.
So again, daily cooking. 7 days all the week. In the tent and you cook. In the tent and you cook. Do y'all want to know why that's so important and why I'm emphasizing that? Because once you come out of captivity, okay, and let's just say you don't have a place of refuge. Let's just say you're running around in America trying to get out. Well, if you're dwelling in a tent, don't you have to cook every day? Won't you have to eat every day? So the Lord is preparing us for something. That's why it's so important to keep this feast. Because the more you live in the tent, the more you're used to setting up your tent, breaking it down. What if you have to move here? What if you have to move there? It's important to know how to start a fire, how to finish cooking your food on the fire, how to put the fire out, how much wood it takes. You know, whether it's how to set up the fire in the wind, how to set up the fire in the rain. What if it's enemies around you? Do you know how to set up a fire with keeping the smoke to where it doesn't alarm other people to surround you and notify your whereabouts? All of these things are important to think about, okay?